The ideal framework for liberating the individual human heart to bring about the highest possible good in every realm of culture is within the context of a loving family. For this reason, we invite you to join us in our living room, our family room, to experience the Spirit of Truth as originally intended. Physical and digital copies of the Reorient book, as well as individual chapters of the book, can be obtained at thereorientbook.com. Please allow the next few moments to add to your joy, and welcome home, friends. Rise up, the world needs you.
So now, with that background, you ready to reorient some more? Yeah. Everybody put on your blue lenses. And let's do this. Note your reactions. Don't try to take every detailed note. Just note your reactions on the right side of the page. Things you might want to revisit as you talk with others afterwards. And actions you want to take. So, what's with the word? You ever heard the term idiom? Yes. These are common phrases, for example, in English vernacular, that we use to describe something, but they end up forming kind of our culture around that. Like, for example, we say, this car has so many horsepower. Really? Like a rocket going into space has thousands of horsepower. It's like, so we're still going, I can send a rocket into space, but it would take this many horses lined up in a row to get there if they were pulling it. Do you see what I'm saying? So we tie this amazing new reality to an old anchor. Isn't that weird? Yes. That we do that? It's like, really? Horses have kind of lost their value compared to rockets. But these are idioms. So here's a few that I discovered about how we use the word word. You should be a person of your word. A person is only as good as their word. How do you know a person is as good as their word? Well, they say one thing, but they mean, right? Or they say same thing, but they mean another. So we're always cautious. It's like built into our DNA to be on the alert if someone says something that's not congruent with who they are. We call them hypocrites, and we're immediately willing to disregard them. Is that true? Yes. But you said. Okay? So here's the irony. These 10 words have been used for 2,000 years, and they're wrong. The way we traditionally say them. And yet, this is what people are inherently going, I don't know. Because they know in their seamer there's an incongruence because of what a word is. Because of this, you should use your words wisely. Or, if you don't, you might end up having a war of words with someone. You might find yourself at a loss for words. The Bible is actually called the Word of God. So you don't want to break your word. Or it might be your famous last words. Right? These are common things that we're trying to emphasize how we feel about words. Okay? So if I tell you something in private, I don't want you to breathe a word. Because you will be judged, Jesus says, at the end of this age by every word that comes out of your mouth. Why is that true? Because to judge something, get this deep in your spirit. Jesus didn't come to judge. So should you. Say this with me. Stop it.
Stop it.
Don't judge.
Don't judge.
You can make distinctions between what's more excellent or what's not most excellent. Do not make a judgment. If you do, you're not like the person of Jesus. And that's who we're trying to conform to. Okay? He makes distinctions, not judgments. Why is this important? Because when you make a judgment, you're saying, I know better. And so guess what God does? Awesome. I'll hold you to that standard. So he doesn't actually judge you by his standard. He actually judges you by your own. That's the measure of rule. If you knew what judgment does to you, you would be very careful about making judgments of other people. Because every judgment you make out of the words of your own mouth is going to determine the measure that you will be evaluated at the end of your life. So, because of that, you don't want people putting words in your mouth that you didn't intend. Okay? Or, someone will say, you took the words right out of my mouth. Okay? Or, you end up eating your words when they're not congruent. So don't mince words. Today, hang on every word. In other words, from the word go, we're going to get some new words to live by. And as we used to say in the 80s, say this with me, word? Word. Word up. Word up. Let's do it. And so, why do we define these words? To define literally means, if you're a photographer, to bring on a concentration and bring into focus. Fine detail, to define. So we're going to look at a few of these in fine detail. But why? Because, you can write this one down, words are the DNA of culture. My friend Bill Clinton here was almost impeached over the word is. Because in legal terms, does every word matter? Yes. Why? Because with every word written in a contract, you're determining the intent of the parties. That's the goal. And so, famously, it became about one word. What did you mean? Let's take marriage. Regardless of how you feel about it, where is the war on marriage being waged? In the court on the definition of marriage. Why? Because if you define it, so goes the... You see this? So, words matter if you want to ultimately, by next Sunday, change culture. Okay? Life. The war on the definition of life is being waged in the courts about what? Define life. When does it begin? I heard someone say on Facebook, maybe it was even my friend Joe, I remember him posting this. It's like, if we find a single cell organism 10 billion galaxies away, life. One growing in your womb? Not sure. Incongruence. Not judging it either way, I'm just saying that's not congruent. If that is life, then this is life. Let's just define what life is and agree. But why does this happen? It has to do with what is a word. We take this for granted, but we shouldn't. Besides human beings, who else is capable of complex language skills on planet Earth? Nobody. This is us. The first thing you get excited about when your children start to develop is what? Their first words. And they begin to form them. Because what are they trying to do? Define the world around them. Okay? So why is this critical? Words, literally defined, the word, is a rare instance in the Old Testament and the New Testament where the definitions are exactly the same. The definition of the word is this. Say it with me. Thought capsule or intent containers. Thought capsules or intent containers. I like to use this visual because a picture is worth 1,000 words. How is that possible? Because this picture can say so much more than I could articulate because of an image that it portrays. Guys, say this with me. Image matters. It matters. If you're designed to be conformed to an image, let's give our children an image to conform to. Yes. If a word is a thought capsule or an intent container, what's the meaning of the word thought? This is fascinating. and where it gets supernatural. The word thought literally means to form something in the real world. So a word is a thought capsule that contains the intent to form in actuality what the word was intended to express. Every word you speak and release into the world is a tiny thought capsule that's shot like an arrow to perform something. So, in the beginning was the Word. Now, would it be okay and be biblical if I just took out the word word and replaced it with that definition? Okay? So, in the beginning was God's intent to form something. Isn't that fun? In the beginning was God's intent to form something. So God said, literally in Genesis 1:3, the word is intended. I read a book 20 years ago by Dr. Wayne Dyer called The Power of Intention. It was all based on this verse. God intended, and he said, let there be light, and what was formed. Because that's exactly what he intended. Let that sink in for just a minute. So he spoke a word, and that word literally formed the image of what he intended. So, every word, he said, that goes out of my mouth, it will not return to me empty, but will actually accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose or intent for which I sent it. So should it be any different with us? No. So, like a special forces soldier, like an Olympic athlete, you should train and exercise and practice to get this thing consistent with what you really intend to form. Otherwise, words are going to perform, which is interesting, perform. Perform. They're going to perform. They're going to form something. So you decide, based upon your intent and how you use them, what actually transpires. This is why in John 1:14, Jesus was the incarnate Word. Because when God created man, Jesus actually represented, but say this with me, I love doing this with words. It's amazing. He represented. Represented. He was the exact representation of what God originally intended when he made man to begin with. That's why he's called the second Adam. Is that cool? So when we look at Jesus, we're looking at the perfect image, not of God, but fully man, being led fully by the Spirit of God, not disconnected in any way. And so that's why he's the Word incarnate. He's not a word, he's the actual thing that the Word was intended to form. Is that neat? This can be a little heavy at the moment, so I like to throw in a cute picture. So this guy I typically refer to as Dwayne because he's just so darn cute and cuddly. You just want to snug him up, right? And so if I said, or Toby, you want to eat Toby? No. You don't want to eat Toby? Well, that's what it says, right? But what if I just add this comma? Want to eat Toby? So you want to eat. This is a question if you want to actually dine together. The other one is actually you want to eat the dog. Now this little comma changed everything about what? The intent of those words. This is amazing to me. But this is also biblical because he said, if you tell the truth I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest jot or even tittle of God's precepts or laws will disappear until its purpose is actually fulfilled. Isn't that cool? And so, does anyone remember biblically what a jot or a tittle is. It's actually the smallest mark that you could make on a piece of paper. And so when they were actually scribing the scrolls, you're using a quill pen. Can you imagine doing this? It was expensive, time-consuming, tedious, took master-level people. And you literally, when you were writing in the Old Testament, when they were writing those first 5 books, they couldn't even lift the pen off. And if they did, they would have to scrap the whole piece. Why? Because if you listed that ink pen and it dropped a little dot, it could change the intent of the whole word. And so God was saying, don't even add a jot or a tittle to what I've said. Stick with it. But what do? In our culture, guys, we say, you know what? That's a cool definition, but I'm never going to say it that way. To me, I want to say it this way. You shouldn't. If you actually want to form what God originally intended, you have to learn to speak the words he intended to form it. Or it will not form it because of the nature of what a word is. And so I've tried my best to not present to you my definitions of these words, but try to reorient my language to the original intent of the words. Make sense? Genesis 3:1. What is the very first thing the adversary said to Adam and Eve? Did God really say? What did he intend, really? There was a war of words immediately, generation 1. Why? Because if you ever want to disrupt what God intended to form on earth, you have to change the word he used to form them. And no wonder we're not forming anything that looks like what God originally intended. My goal was not to be divisive. My goal was to rightly divide the word of truth so that we could unite around them.